But one of the things that I realize on this channel is that there are people from all over the world who watch these videos, but I'm primarily going to speak to the American audience at this moment. Right now, I am standing on Juno Beach, which was assaulted by the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division on D-Day. And a lot of Americans, I would say, in general, don't have a great understanding of what happened outside of Omaha Beach. A lot of it has to do with the movie Saving Private Ryan and just the sheer volume of violence that happened on Omaha Beach. What people may not realize, though, is that the second highest casualty rate happened right here on Juno Beach. And if you look at casualties in proportion to the landing force, it's actually a higher percentage of casualties here on Juno Beach than anywhere else. But today, we are going to link up with somebody who really knows this place well and see what we can learn about what the Canadians did here on June 6th, 1944. Right now, I mentioned that I don't know as much about Juno Beach as what I should, which is why I have this guy right here. This is Paul Woodadge from the YouTube channel World War II TV. It's legitimately one of my favorite channels on YouTube. It is like getting a master's degree in World War II history. He's been a guide here for what, like 20 years
now, yeah.
20 years?
Yeah.
Okay. He's British. He's been living here. I don't know, does that make you British or French?
Still British.
Still British.
British, yeah.
All right. So anyway, he's going to tell us a little bit more about what happened here on June 6, 1944.
So one of the things about Juno Beach is, unlike the other 4 beaches, all the sectors have this massive great seawall here. And it looks big to us today, but actually it was even higher at the time because there's more sand today than there was in 1944. The other issue is the German defences, which are heavy here, lots of German defenders. They've camouflaged bunkers into houses, so some of them haven't shown up on aerial photos. Behind these houses are German mortar positions, in trenches in the gardens behind. You've also got the fact that there's less of a bombardment on Juno Beach because of the fear of the killing of French civilians, because although we need to dislodge the Germans, there's a certain nicety about the invasion that we don't want to kill too many French because we need them to help us navigate our way inland and things like that. So there's less of a bombardment here. Another thing about Juno Beach is there's no tank support in the first few minutes because there's a sandbar out there and the LCTs bring in the Sherman DD, the duplex drive of amphibious tanks, couldn't come in till a bit later. And finally, I want to talk about how brilliantly sighted the German weapons are. This bunker up here to my left contains a 5 centimeter German pack gun of the type they use all along the beach. There's one at Pegasus Bridge on Utah Beach. And here, when we go and look at it, you'll see it's sighted, so it's got about 5 angles of coverage. It covers this beach, enfilading down this way towards the Wiestram and towards the east. It can also swing round and cover down the side of the wall there where there's a chap walking his dog, and it can also cover the streets behind. So it's been very well sighted. And I always explain to groups, look how it's protected against the seawall with that massive great wall of concrete there, which means our bombardment ships coming in, they can fire away at that with 5-inch shells, 6-inch shells, unless they get a direct hit. And even with a direct hit, they're unlikely to penetrate that concrete. So by having the gun protected, it's firing sideways down the beaches, which increases its killing power. And another thing I want to say while we're on the beach here, there's a very famous photo taken a few days after D-Day of a P47 Thunderbolt that crash landed right here on the beach. And in the view behind, you can see all these same buildings and the same road and the same seawall, and particularly along the top of this wall, I talked about the height of it. There's just an entanglement of barbed wire that kind of looks like bushes. It's so thick. So if you're landing here in the first or second wave, not only have you got to worry about being shot at by the weaponry in the bunkers, the machine guns in the Tobruks there, and getting over the wall, if you get to the top of the wall, there's this massive great entanglement of barbed wire as well. And then there's a second line of defenders, Germans in the houses behind. Now in fact, this section of beach was actually taken out from behind. The troops, including 48 Royal Marine Commando and the New Brunswick North Shore Regiment, actually attacked slightly to my west and kind of flanked round. This is V de Stonsnest 27 and attacked it from behind, coming in from the streets behind to attack it. So it worked out reasonably well here. That said, on Juno Beach, you're talking about 85% losses, killed and wounded in the first wave landing, and it's comparative to Omaha Beach in that regard. In fact, in terms of fatalities as a percentage, more Canadians were killed on Juno Beach than were Americans on Omaha Beach as a percentage of the force that came ashore.
All right, so here's the bunker that Paul was talking about here at V de Stonsnest 27, and we can see some battle damage from D-Day on here. These things were just insanely well built. I had a friend who he disembarked at Omaha Beach in August of '44, and he talked to an engineer, and he said there was hardly enough dynamite to blow these things up. They were just powerful fortresses here on the beaches. I also want to take a moment to point out this seawall, or get a little bit closer look at it. Now, as Paul said, it would have been even taller on D-Day, like 6 foot taller. So each one of the beaches had their own unique challenges. At Sword, you have a very high concentration of bunkers. At Omaha, you have the bluffs. At Utah, it's flooded inland. But man, I'll tell you what, the idea of landing on this beach and having to deal with this seawall, pretty intimidating.
So this is the 5-centimeter German gun. I was talking about the pack, and it was taken out from behind. Before I tell you about how it was taken out, I want to talk about its sighting, because this gun barrel can point down the beach that way in front of the wall there. It can point up that road there in case it gets attacked from the side. It can turn inland up that road towards the centre of the village where the church is. It can point this way down the beach. That's its main purpose. But it can also point that road there. Now, in what actually happened here is the Canadian forces and British commandos actually landed that side to the west and flanked round and came in from behind. And on the wall here, you can see what's likely to be a 75mm impact there from a shell from an M10 tank destroyer, Canadian tank destroyer, that came in this way here. So clearly logic tells us that if that had been fired from something from the sea, it'd be the other side facing the sea. This was from inland. And this is one of the things about defeating these German positions, is that headlong attacks landing on beaches are obviously very tricky because the Germans are set up to defend that. But if you can get round the back and come in from behind, you can outwit the Germans. But of course, to get behind, the Canadians had to land in front of other bunkers down there, so they'd already incurred their casualties down there. The bunkers actually came under fire from have long since gone away to erosion. This is the one we're left with here. I also want to point out about the construction. When you see some of the footage of this, this is clearly a 1942 or 1943 bunker rather than later 1944 one. And the reason we can tell that is it's been made using poured concrete into a wooden form. And you can see on the front of it where the wooden planks have left their impression in the concrete. And poured concrete with decent reinforcing inside it is much stronger than the later technique the Germans used, where they use concrete blocks like brickwork essentially. And they cast the blocks up on site, made 2 walls of concrete, cemented them together like you would bricks, and then poured wet concrete in the middle. But that form of construction wasn't as tough and strong as the poured concrete of earlier. And the simple reason the Germans had to revert to the block technique from the wood form technique is they were struggling to get wood from Germany to the coasts anymore because of the bombing of the railroads. Air power, air supremacy is an important part of the Normandy campaign. And even before the landings took place, all through the spring of 44, late 1943, the infrastructure of France is being pounded by day, by night, by the 9th Air Force, 2nd Tactical Air Force, and the transport hubs, and wood being flammable, very difficult to transport to the coast. So the Germans simply hadn't got any wood anymore to make these forms. There were also shortage of steel, there was also a shortage of workers. So basically, what I'm telling you is a 1944 concrete bunker is almost certainly not as strong as a 1943 one, and it shows the effect of the preparation for the landings by this bombardment, this knocking out of the Germans' ability to bring up stuff and supplies. And it's not all about what happened on June the 6th, it's about what happened in the preparation for those landings, and you can see that in the decline of quality of the German fortifications.
Earlier, Paul was talking about a P47 that crash landed here on Juno Beach. That was piloted by Second Lieutenant John Alfred Weiss, who was 24 years old at the time. And they have a little thing here talking about him, and they show that picture. Well, that happened right there in that area. Now, one of the things that I failed to mention about Juno Beach is that it was divided up into 3 subsections, codenamed Love, Mike, and Nan. The area that we were just in was Nan, and we've just moved down to the town of Bernières-sur-Mer. And this is the area where the Queen's Own Rifles would have landed on D-Day. So they have this map here that really does a good job of showing us where everything is at along Juno Beach. Now this area right here, that is Sword Beach. Down around here, this is the area of Calm. In an earlier video, we were right here. This is the Pegasus Bridge area. There were actually Canadian paratroopers to the east of here too. And then right in here, this is the spot where we started off at. This is the Nan Red sector. And then right here is where we are now. This is Nan White. And then further off to the west, well, that is the Mike sector. Here along the beach, we have several of these Tobruks that served as machine gun positions for the Germans who were defending this beach. So for the Canadian guys who were storming these shores, well, they had a tough job ahead of them, especially in that first wave. Now, we talked earlier about the seawall, and whenever you're here in this section of Juno Beach, it's really, really deceptive. It looks like, you know, the Queen's Own Rifles would have jumped off and had a pretty easy go of it. There's about 8 feet more sand here than there was in 1944. So this would have had some very high walls that they would have had to have scaled with ladders. So if you ever come here, don't think that this is exactly the beach as it was in 1944.
So this is the centre of where B Company, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, landed, and their target in terms of their identifying feature was a big house we're going to walk down to in a minute that was sort of centre of the Juno Beach landings. And this was just under 5 pillboxes, Tobruks, machine guns there. The losses down here were horrendous. And as we walk down there, every yard we take, one Canadian life was kind of lost for that yard. But this particular bunker that had a 5cm gun was taken out by men who were under command of Company Sergeant Major Charles Martin from Toronto, and his men kind of worked their way behind here and knocked it out with grenades. One was a French Canadian, I think one was an indigenous native Indian, forget his name. But what was exciting about this story here, and while I'm here on my tours, is as Charlie Martin was working his way across this field that we're going to go look at in a minute towards the centre of town, the church, he's grateful he's got his men out of this killing ground, having left dozens of his men killed and wounded here. As he's walking across the field there, he starts coming under fire from Germans near or in the church tower of Bernier-sur-Mer, and so his men kind of go to ground. At about the same time, Charlie Martin, who's leading his men across, he feels his foot, or he hears his foot click on the mechanism of an anti-personnel mine. The shoe mine type thing. Now these things don't go off on the downward click, they go off when you release your foot and the pressure goes off. So he's got his foot standing on an as yet undetonated anti-personnel mine. He has the presence of mind to kind of push his men on. They kind of look down, they realise that there are kind of bumps in the earth there where these mines were, so they're able to navigate their way through okay. And they move on, but he's now still standing on an undetonated landmine. So while he's doing that, the Germans then realise he's not moving, so they're starting to get their machine gun fire more accurate at him. So he's thinking, if I don't do something about the landmine, I'm going to get killed by machine gun fire anyway, so I better do something. And he has the presence of mind that he jumps off the landmine, thus activating it, and gets himself as flat and as low on the ground beside it, hoping the explosion goes up and over him, which is exactly what happens. He hits the ground really fast, the explosion detonates sort of 3 or 4 feet off the ground. The explosive, the shrapnel goes left and right. He's not wounded by it at all, dusts himself down. He ends up getting with his men about 7 miles inland that day to a village called Annecy, which is something that's very important because the Canadians on Juno Beach, despite suffering 85% losses on average getting off the beach, they do manage to push their way inland and achieve most of their inland objectives. And he was one of the rare Canadian soldiers who received a gallantry medal, but not for specific action. In the British and Canadian forces, we tend to give them for something very specific, like knocking out a machine gun nest or disabling an enemy tank. He got his for like a collection of a series of events where he demonstrated fantastic leadership, sort of like one of those honorary Oscars people get at the end of their careers when they haven't got a single award for a particular film, which is not how gallantry medals are normally awarded, but it was a recognition of his brilliant leadership throughout the campaign. And the reason why he's a sergeant major, interestingly, is the Canadian Infantry are actually a bit short of platoon commanders, lieutenants, first and second lieutenants, partly because of the CAN loan program, the Canadian loan program, which meant as fast as the Canadians were generating officers, the British were, my country, were stealing them for their own forces. Stealing is a strong word there, but when you go to the cemeteries in Normandy, you'll see in the British cemeteries lots of CAN loan officers that will say Lieutenant Smith from Toronto, Montreal or whatever, attached to the whichever the British regiment is, the Middlesex Regiment, the Berkshire Regiment, the Somerset Light Infantry, and he's a CAN loan officer. So in fact, in the Canadian assault waves, there are a lot of NCOs, sergeant majors and sergeants, doing the leadership job because there's a shortage of platoon commanders. It depends in which unit you're at, but that's a particular thing about Charlie Martin. So his incident with a landmine was just across there in what's now a little football field, and then we'll walk down towards this building that I talked about a second ago.
So here's the field that Paul was just talking about that Charlie Martin traversed and stepped on that shoe mine. So pretty amazing to think about the fact that he crossed right here and survived. Something else that Paul told me that is not in the tour books, I don't think, is that this place right here during the German occupation served as how shall we say it, a house of ill repute for the German soldiers. Alright, so I'm kind of shooting into the sun right now, so I don't know how well this will turn out, but there's a famous photo of a Canadian soldier standing right here next to this Tobruk, which had a Polish machine gun. And just to show you how much the sand has risen over the years, his head is right about where, the top of his head rather, is right about where the sand level is right now. So as you're looking down this beach right here, it doesn't look like that on June 6th. It would have been about 8 feet lower, and the Canadians would have had much higher walls to scale here. Well, if you've read or studied anything about Juno Beach, well, then this house right here should be familiar to you. This was one of the most important landmarks for the Queen's Own Rifles on D-Day. It's a very large place and kind of sticks out more than any other. And there's a placard here that talks about the number of men who were killed just within sight of this house. So you're looking at probably over 100 men who were killed, several more, or dozens more who were wounded. And this was the first house on French soil that was liberated by the Allied forces coming from the sea. Here next to the Canada House, they have a picture showing what it would have looked like right after D-Day. So again, you can see how much higher the wall is. And also, it looks like it got stitched up on the side here by, I don't know, something from the west. Of course, that's been patched up. But, yeah, pretty cool to be standing here at this iconic spot on Juno Beach. All right, well, I'm kind of moving into town a little bit right now. And, you know, I talked about how all of the different beaches had different challenges. Another one of the challenges here at Utah Beach is that we see urban combat in the Juno Beach zone. So once the soldiers got off of the beach, you know, Omaha and Utah, it's just farm country. Here, it's a lot of house-to-house fighting. So there are a few cool things here that Paul showed me that I want to show you. So we've moved into town a little bit here, and this picture is showing a bunch of Canadian troops with some of the local French civilians, and it was from this building right here that radio transmissions were set up mid-morning on D-Day and broadcast to the world that the landings had been a success. So we're used to kind of, you know, instant gratification with our information and knowing things as they happen. It wasn't like that in the 1940s. They had to get things set up, and yeah, that all happened right here. It says on that placard also that they used carrier pigeons along with the radio transmissions. This kind of stuff is just cool as heck to me. So there's the landing beach right there. Well, on D-Day, some of these roads would have been blocked up, and there was an armored vehicle of some kind, may have been a Sherman, but some sort of tracked vehicle that came down this road right here. And I guess there was something on the right side of the road, whether it was logs or other vehicles or something that was blocking it. So it had to jump the curb. And look at this. You can see where the side of this curb is all chewed up from the tracks of that vehicle. I know I don't know. That kind of stuff just really fascinates me. These little things that you wouldn't know otherwise, but are pieces of evidence from the combat that occurred here. Well, that was just a little bit of what happened here on Juno Beach on June 6th, 1944. A lot of brave men who stormed these beaches here and fought and died in the name of freedom. So glad that we were able to come to this place today. It makes me honestly want to learn more about the Canadian contribution during not only D-Day in Normandy, but World War II in general. If you really want to get an insane education on, again, not just D-Day, but World War II, Paul's channel, World War II TV, is second to none. Like I said earlier, you're going to get a master's level education from some of the best historians in the World War II history universe. But anyway, that was Juno Beach.